real quick. Do you guys know that God's judgments can be trusted? I challenge you guys to read Psalm 119. Because in Psalm 119, he talks about how he longs for his judgments. You know, his heart pants after and craves the judgments of God. In fact, he thanks him for his judgments because he says that his judgments actually caused him to return to him. And so the judgments of God are very important. And if you were raised in a strict home, if you were raised in a situation that was abusive or whatever, it's hard to trust God in his decisions regarding your discipline and things like that. And so I just want to encourage you to know the difference. You know, there's a judgment where the Lord is pronouncing condemnation. You know, that even though he's a God of love, like, have you ever been in a house where people bring their kids over and their kids pee all over your furniture and attack your animals and destroy your kids' rooms? Have y'all ever had anything similar to that? Because I have, okay? Well, I remember Kent had this friend that came over and systematically dismantled all his Gundam things. I don't know if y'all have ever seen that show, but they're like robot things and just one by one, hundreds of dollars worth. Remember that? Well, think if God allowed everyone into heaven, even those that don't believe in him, can you see the chaos that would occur? And not only that, but the Lord cleansed the heavens of all sin with the Lord's blood, so it doesn't make sense to allow people back in. And so because of that, the Lord will pronounce judgment against people and remove them. One can be Hitler, okay? You know, that's an obvious deal. Anyway, so you have to understand that whatever decisions he makes, it's always in fairness. And it kind of goes along with what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to start in Romans 5:6. And last week we talked about how the paradox of suffering. And so when you suffer, if you're suffering supernaturally, can we just adopt that phrase? Supernatural suffering, okay? So when you're suffering supernaturally, what happens is it actually draws you closer to the Lord, and his love is made more manifest, and your hope actually grows stronger. And that is weird, because you would think it would be the exact opposite. So a sign of not suffering supernaturally would be if you're getting bitter. Okay? So if you're backsliding, if you're getting bitter, if you're, you know, not making progress in the Lord, if your trust in him is being attacked and you don't know how to get that back, then more than likely, you know, your suffering is not being done under his power. And so he talks about that. And let's just recap with verse 5, and then we'll go on into verse 6. And it says, "Now hope does not disappoint. And the reason why is because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who is given to us." And what the original Greek literally means is that the love of God is continuously being displayed in the midst of our suffering. And so because of that, because of him pouring out his kindness, because of him showing himself, almost showing off, you know, he loves to show himself plainly. People are like, well, if God exists, why doesn't he just let everybody know? Because he has. You're just not listening. You know. And so as we are suffering and we see these signs of love, what happens is we actually begin to hope that there will come an end. Suffering is a momentary blink of an eye. You know what I mean? If you go through it well, it actually advances you in the future kingdom of heaven on earth. It's very important to get that fact. And again, like we talked about last week, the primary source of suffering, do y'all remember what it is? What?
Is to mold us.
Right, but who is the primary people? People. They're like our gray scrubbers. Sandpaper. Some people got 80 grit. Someone's got 100 grit sandpaper in their life, but they are. That's what they're for. And I guarantee you that you're sandpaper to someone else's, life. So I know I am. Every once in a while, that's very obvious. Okay, now let's continue on verse 6. We're going to read 6 through 8. This blows me away. I'm going to unpack it for you. But it says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Now, the word for we were without strength, there's several ways you can translate it from the original Greek. Here are just a few so you know what he's talking about. One says, "For while we were helpless in our own sins." Another says, "while we were powerless to help ourselves." And another says, "when we were utterly helpless with no way of escape." In other words, there was no answer for the sin problem. The blood of bulls and goats could only cover it. Okay, it could not cleanse it away. And so, seeing this problem, obviously, the Lord had his solution. In fact, before he created man, he said, before the foundations of the world, the Lamb was slain. Okay? And so we're going to kind of get into some sovereignty tonight and some choices and things like that. So if you have any questions at the end, we'll have a question and answer. And if I forget, just say, "Hey, Q&A." Well, you don't have to say, "Hey, Q&A," but, just let me know because I sometimes forget. Which, by the way, Shelly, I have not forgotten to look for the book. I just could not get to my bookshelf because I had a full house. Like, literally, there's a bed, and I can't get to the bookshelf, so I'll look later. All right. Now, I'm going to read this to you in the Weiss translation, and then I'm going to break it down. It says, "For when we were yet without strength, in a strategic season, Christ, instead of and in behalf of those who do not have reverence or respect, fear for God, and are devoid of godliness, died. For very rarely, in behalf of one of those individuals who is legally exact and precise in his observance of the customs and rules of the society in which he lives, will anyone die. But maybe in behalf of one of those who is generous in heart, always doing good, would a person dare to die. But God is constantly proving his own love to us. Because while we were yet sinners, Christ in behalf of us died." Now notice constantly proving. That's present tense. That's ongoing action. And so the death of Christ and his resurrection didn't end 2,000 years ago. His blood still cries out mercy. You know what I mean? And it always will. His blood, or his death and his resurrection is a living reality to this day. And so that right there should cause us to never again think he doesn't love us. See, what happens is when you suffer, you begin to think that God, do you really love me? I mean, if you love me, this wouldn't be happening. And that's a warped mindset that the enemy puts in your head. Because the love question was answered at the cross. You know what I mean? And if we spent time just pondering that one thing, we would never again doubt his love for us. And I encourage you to do that. Just sit and meditate on the fact that even though you weren't born yet, you were in his plan. You were born a sinner, and yet he died for you at the cross, just like he died for those that, in the present time when he lived. And what's even more amazing is the ones that ripped out his beard, and the ones that spit on his face, and the ones that filleted him alive, where his intestines were literally hanging out. Okay, his internal organs were exposed, unrecognizable. And he said, "Forgive them. They do not know what they're doing." And so, settle that question in your heart, his love for you. Because perfect love casts out fear, right? Now, here's what the original Greek says. Complete, mature love casts out the fear of judgment. If you fear God's judgments or discipline, then you don't have mature love. If you have mature love, you can be like, "Do whatever you want with me. I trust you." Does that make sense? I remember when I was first born again, I think I told this story a few months back, but I felt like the Holy Spirit was telling me to write a contract out to him. And I'm like, because there was like a commitment to follow him and all that. I was still, immature in my love. Like, I didn't know he could be trusted yet. I didn't know, like, what if he asked me to do something really weird? What if I have to give up things I like? You know what I mean? Like, you got all those questions. And but I did it anyway. And I still have it in some of my prized possessions, but I signed it. I wrote it in red and the whole 9 yards. And when I think back to that time, I think how foolish it was. He is so, not the contract, but my thoughts. He is so gracious and kind, and he can be absolutely fully trusted. And I'll tell you this, I don't trust people to do what they're supposed to do. I do trust him. And so if people try to mess with me, I know that he's got my back. Does that make sense? And so actually what he ends up doing is when people come against me, he begins to exalt my head above my enemies so that it's almost embarrassing. Have y'all ever had that happen? I'll never forget, and I'm not going to say the name of the church or anything like that, but there was this church that didn't like me very much. And the church secretary, and it's not in the city, the church secretary and one of the good friends of the secretary had no idea. And so I was having a conference, and this was years ago, and they came to the conference, and I'm like, well, how did they find out about the conference? I mean, their pastor doesn't like me at all, and like, how did they, and I'm all confused. Well, this is what God did. They heard about the conference, and they made a flyer for the bulletin at that church without the pastor knowing and stuck it in there. And all these people came to the conference. And I was like, oh, that probably won't happen again. But those are just like little instances where God's like, you know what? I'm going to honor the servant of the Lord because they're pursuing me. And we're all servants in here, okay? So just know that whenever things are coming against you, I promise, He's got a plan, okay? So we're going to kind of look at that even more. But the very nature of Christ is love. God is love. He never ceases to be that. And that's where we kind of get messed up here on the judgment thing and the suffering thing, because especially when we begin to process it in our own thinking. Because what happens is like, if you have children, you discipline them. When we raised Kent, I hated disciplining him. Hated it, but I knew it was for his good. And so it's the same thing with the Lord. If he did not pronounce judgments, can you imagine where we'd be? Let's look back at before Noah's time. Okay? God did not want to destroy all of the human race. That was not his desire. But he saw that because every thought and intent of every single person on the planet. Now you got to understand, this is every single person except for 8. Noah and his family. Every person on the planet was so evil that God knew if he did not destroy them, eventually it would corrupt Noah and his family. Noah was the only one that was righteous in his generations. He was righteous in his seed. He was righteous in his bloodline. Okay? That bloodline was necessary for Christ to come. Okay? So if the enemy corrupted that bloodline, then what that would mean is there would be no Messiah. And so he had to wipe out all of mankind to preserve a way of salvation. Okay? So begin to think of the Lord's judgments and his mercy and all of that in light of how he thinks. And it's in the Word. That's how you're going to figure it out. So we're going to go to Genesis 15:12. And I'm going to, it blew my mind. I hope it'll blow your mind. But we're going to kind of look at the strategic season of time. Okay? Why did Christ come at the specific time that he came? Why didn't he come earlier? Why did he come from the beginning? Why didn't he come maybe in our time? There's a strategic purpose. And so we're going to look at history. Now, if you look at the word history, it says his story. Okay? So the story of mankind is God's story. He chose to involve himself with us. All right? And so time goes on. And a lot of people have said, well, man is just puppets in God's hand. Like, have y'all seen that DirecTV wireless commercial where the girls on all those wires? That's how a lot of the church thinks that we are. But the fact is that this is all sovereignty means, okay? It means that a king is able to intervene and has dominion over all. And so because of his authority, because he was not created by his subjects, he's above all of them. And when he sees things happening, he will then at opportune, strategic times intervene. So what's happening though is we're in the present tense trial, crisis, whatever you want to call it. That's all we see. And we're like, why is he taking so long to do anything? When am I going to get that job? When is that person going to return to the Lord? When is this going to happen? You know, and we're asking all these questions, and he's waiting for the exact opportune time for everything to fall into place. If you could peel back and look into the supernatural realm, you would see angels busy arranging things. You would see God speaking over you the things he wants to do in his word. You would be seeing all of this stuff coming into place, and then bam. And I think where I learned that the most was one time Mike was at work for, I think, about 4 months. And I remember thinking, my goodness, 4 months, can we get moving here? And then I think at the same time, my business like dropped down to what, 1 client a week? We didn't go hungry, paid all of our bills. One bill was late, it was the phone bill. Tithes sometimes 30 cents, because all we had that week was $3. You know what I mean? I never forget that, our quarter and our nickel. And anyway, and so I remember thinking, what on earth is going on? Well, the Lord kept telling me, I'm working on it. And I'm like, what do you mean you're working on it? You're God. Just go, job, let one appear, something, Well, what he was doing is he was arranging circumstances behind the scenes with the next place Mike would work. And so some people had to be out of there, some people had to be brought in, and everything had to come together, okay? So his sovereignty is that when he sees you in trouble, when he sees the next thing that needs to occur in your life, when he begins to see these things, what he does is he sets things in motion. And sometimes you can be caught by surprise, okay? But that's where faith has to come up. Now let's read Genesis 15:12. And I'm going to explain some things to you guys because I want you to understand that his sovereignty does not negate free will. So Genesis 15, verse 12. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. And he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will not serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you will go to your fathers in peace, and you will be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Now, what is he talking about? Now, let me point out a few things. Abram has no kids yet. You know what I mean? So your descendants are going to come back here after being slaves for 400 years. Okay? So that would be the first thing that would need to occur is he'd actually have to have a kid. All right? But the Lord was saying, no, certainly. In other words, nothing on this planet is going to stop what I'm going to do with your descendants. Okay? And so he was saying, basically what's going to happen is your descendants are going to become slaves to the Egyptians, but it's going to be for a certain amount of time. And then at the perfect time, they will be delivered, that nation will be judged, and then they will return to the land of Canaan, which is where Abram was. Now, do you guys remember the story where Abram and Lot had to separate? They're kind of fighting and fussing with one another. Well, Lot represents a carnal Christian where he looks out and he sees the green, Now, we can say Clovis is green now because we've had all this rain. But if you were to put Clovis next to, I don't know, California, or Clovis next to the Carolinas, would actually get rain. If you would put them together, you'd be like, I'll take that place, you can have Clovis, right? And so that's kind of the situation. And so Lot's like, well, I'll go here. And so he left. And then, only then, when there was a separation from the carnal Christian, could Abraham see his inheritance. He didn't hear the Lord when Lot was with him, as often as he did when Lot left. And so he looks and he surveys the land. It's more desert than anything, rugged mountains. okay? And he walks it. He walks the entire thing while he was alive. And I kind of wonder, like, when he was taking his steps, was he like, I claim this. This is my land. This is my descendants' land. You know, I just kind of wonder, what was he thinking? He bought a piece of land to bury him and Sarah. And that land later became by Jerusalem, where the patriarchs and stuff insisted that they were not born out of the grave, buried in the grave, okay? Now, I want to just list a few things that were going to happen for all of this to come to pass, okay? We're talking 400 years. So first of all, Abram would have to have a kid. That kid would have to have a kid, and his name was Jacob. In the process of time, Jacob would have to be the one to receive the birthright, because only the one with the birthright had the promise of the Messiah. Okay? So if you did not accept the birthright, if you gave up the birthright, whatever it was, you were no longer in the godly seed line. You forfeited that right. Then, Jacob would have to leave home and marry 2 women, because out of those 2 women came the tribes of Israel. Right? Then, we had the jealousy that was displayed by the brothers. Okay, Joseph would have to be born, and then he had 2 dreams that he would one day rule over his brothers and even over his parents. And even his dad's all, You know, he didn't deny it. He's just like, I mean, if your kid came to you and said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to rule over you one day, probably get a spanking. You know what I mean? And so, the 2 dreams, and I want to point this out, did not make sense. Because they couldn't see that they would end up in Egypt. They didn't foresee the drought that was in them there. They didn't foresee that Joseph would disappear. You know what I mean? Like, they had no idea what was about to come. And so the dreams made no sense. It is so important, especially for those of you that are dreamers, write them down. Even if they don't make sense, you need to write them down and date them. Because what will happen is all of a sudden you'll see it coming to pass. Right? Now, some dreams, he'll give you an interpretation right off the bat. Some dreams, you'll get half of what it means. Some dreams, you'll have no idea, okay? Now, the thing is don't over-spiritualize it either when you get dreams. You know, don't say, well, that must be spiritual and it represents this or that. Sometimes your dreams are very literal. And so Joseph has these 2 dreams. Now, it spurs this jealousy in the brothers to the point of murderous rage. Okay? Now, did God put the murderous rage and jealousy in their hearts? No, but He used it. Okay? Because what happened is Joseph, now this is what's a trip. Joseph is told by his dad, go give your brothers or go find them, see what's up. Okay? So he goes to this place. There's this random dude wandering around in the middle of nowhere. Okay? Joseph comes up to him and says, hey, have you seen my brothers? I mean, I don't know about you, but I probably wouldn't just, pull over a random car and say, hey, have you seen Mike? You know what I mean? And so this random dude's walking around and he asks him, he said, well, I think they were over there. And so it's like, if you read that story carefully, it is almost like his steps are being ordered for him to be sold into slavery. It really does. And so sure enough, he finds them. Oh, there's the dreamer. There's the father's favorite. And so they are like, hey, let's just kill him. No, don't kill him. Cast him into that well. Okay, cast him into the pit. Well, we can make money off of him. So then they sell him as a slave. All of that happened to get him to Egypt. Now the question is, well, okay, if all of that happened, was it necessary? Was that God's will that his brothers do that sin? Was that God's will that he's thrown in a pit? Was it God's will that he was sold as a slave? I don't know. I tend to not think so. I think there was probably a better way. However, God used it for good, right? And so then, all of that has to happen. And this is where the brilliance of God is displayed. I want you to wrap your minds around this. Whenever things don't go God's way, because there's a permissive and perfect will, we're going to get into that. He doesn't go, oh no, what am I going to do? Gabriel, what do you say? He's not bothered, okay? What he does is he begins to examine the situation and begins to work it for his purposes. So I want you guys to go away with this thought for sure. No devil in hell and no person on earth can keep you from God's plan. You can. Okay? How are you going to respond to betrayal? How are you going to respond to offense? Joseph could have been like, God left me. He doesn't love me. What am I going to do? I'm all alone. He missed his dad. You know, all of this stuff. He could have been bitter and offended. Instead, he maintained purity, he maintained joy, and he maintained excellence. So when you're faced with these situations, you decide. You know what I mean? God doesn't decide. You decide whether you're going to become better or bitter. And really, it's a stepping stone. If you pass this test, you actually gain more authority in the spiritual realm and more anointing because you've allowed the crushings of the Lord to come upon you. And what the enemy wanted to use to destroy you doesn't work, and so that really gets in his head, which I like doing that. So the Lord used evil men to fashion Joseph into the man that would rule with the Pharaoh all of Egypt. The greatest empire. They're like America, you know, back then. Okay? Now, Romans 8:28. I wouldn't say that's my life verse, but I think it needs to be for every Christian, at least one of them. And let's just read it real quick, and then we'll go through everything else that needs to occur for that prophecy to be fulfilled. And it's very, very much quoted. Okay, all of a sudden I have forgotten where Romans is. Here we go. Okay, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. Okay? So we know that, but have y'all ever really studied what's going on before that scripture? Okay. Look at this. Let's start at verse 25. But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what we should pray as we ought. But the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the heart knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. The reason, guys, all things work together for your good is because of intercession. It's you pray. It's you getting in the secret place. It's you asking the Holy Spirit, hey, what do I do with this? What's going on? You know, what do you have to say? I'm not hearing anything, okay? Pray in the Spirit. You know what I mean? That's the answer. So we think that we can go through life and not have much of a relationship with God and everything's going to work for our good. Well, guess what? It won't. Because the other part is to those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. All of us are called according to his purpose, but not everyone loves him. And what I mean by that is you have affection for, you might, like them, but God love, agape love, that's different. Agape love is seen by you being obedient to him, okay? And so people are like, I just love God, and they're going out doing whatever they want to do. They don't love God, they're deceiving themselves. And another sign that you love him is if you love one another, okay? So you can't say, I love God, and you don't love the people that you can see with your eyes, okay? So those are just two requirements. So intercession, I guarantee you Joseph was praying. I guarantee you that when he was in that pit, he was praying. When he was sold as a slave, he prayed. When he was a slave, he prayed. And then you know what else happened? He gets falsely accused, right, by Potiphar's wife. And so she lies about him. He's a slave. The husband knows what kind of wife she is, but he can't do that, right? And so Joseph, being a slave, is a scapegoat, goes to prison. Now, what is incredible is when he was in prison, and if you read the story, you'll see the baker and the cupbearer. Okay, so they have the dreams, he interprets them. The Bible says that your gift will make a way before you. So he's like, okay, I'm going to interpret these. Number one, you're going to die tomorrow. Two, you're going to get out. When you get out, please mention me to Pharaoh. Please get me out of here. And the language of it in the original Hebrew, he was in there for another 3 years. And actually, it appears that was what the Lord was going to do to finish off his refining. Is that not crazy? All perfect time, strategic season. Okay? And so, another thing that had to happen was after 400 years, Moses had to be born. Right? So, you got to have Moses. Well, at the time that he's born, an evil Pharaoh is like, I'm going to kill off all the Hebrew males. And the reason why is that instead of the Hebrew stock, Hebrew seed,